This is terrible!
Hey, hello, how do you do? Shady Doorags here. Gonna be doing something different today, something I've been meaning to do for quite some time. I've talked about both Avatar: The Last Airbender, or Atla, and The Legend of Korra, or T-Lock, multiple times here on the channel. In case you're new, a quick summary is that Atla is my favorite show of all time, tied with DuckTales 2017. And T-Lock, while not a show I hate, definitely feels like a downgrade of the series. Last year, in one of my Atla reviews, I mentioned the infamous "you gotta deal with it" scene from T-Lock.
Previously on Avatar.
The 16-year rule implies that for generations, avatars didn't have a way of figuring out who they were without someone else telling them. Aang is naturally good at bending 3 of the elements, but didn't know he could bend 2 of those 3 until he was told he was the avatar. So yeah, this awful scene where Korra just bends 3 elements flawlessly at the freaking age of 4? Stop trying to defend it! As you can imagine, this did not go over well with Korra stans. Now, I'm not gonna apologize for what I said, but I definitely could have said it better. In the videos I make, I try not to attack my audience in any kind of serious way. Don't get me wrong, I attack them plenty, no one is safe from my ire, but it's always with a joking tone so that everyone keeps having a good time. I can see how this time around though, I didn't use the best diction, and what I said came across as more antagonistic than it was meant to. The reason I worded this particular argument in this particular way is because I thought it was understood by virtually everyone that that scene was a bad one. I genuinely believed that the people who would defend that scene would be in the vast minority, like almost non-existent, even among T-Lock fans. So I thought that while I might get 1 or 2 complaints, most people wouldn't care too much about that specific critique. And then I got more than 1 or 2 complaints. While they were still the minority of comments, I got way more people angrily telling me they disagree with me than I thought I would. And over on Twitter, I see T-Lock fans constantly defending this scene, claiming it's not only not bad, but actually really good. So I'm here to try again, but this time I'm gonna be thorough. I want to talk about what this scene means to me in its entirety because frankly, I think it's a very important scene, not just to Atla and T-Lock, but to storytelling and literature analysis in general. We'll get into all that jazz momentarily, but first, a quick recap. The scene shows 3 people traveling through a blizzard. Korra's father, Tonrock, greets them and respectfully addresses them as the White Lotus. The group enters the house where Korra's mother, Senna, is in the middle of cleaning up a mess, presumably made by Korra herself. One of the White Lotus members asks the parents how can they be sure that their daughter is the one. Thus enters Korra, who says the now infamous line,
Avatar, you gotta deal with it!
And proceeds to flawlessly bend 3 of the 4 elements. Now, to analyze something objectively, you need to compare its good with its bad. Let's start with the good. First, the scene successfully establishes setting. This is somewhere with a harsh cold climate. If you've seen Atla, you can probably guess it's the South Pole given the architecture. We also see that the White Lotus from Atla is still active and that they've taken the responsibility of finding the Avatar. Through seeing a destroyed house, we get a glimpse of Korra's personality. She's rambunctious, probably amplified by the fact that she's a child. And when Korra enters the room, we get a clearer demonstration of that. This is relevant since this personality trait will follow her as she matures. And there's one more positive thing worth mentioning, but to fully understand it, we first need to talk about some lore. T-Lock is a continuation of Atla, so it needs to match its lore with its predecessors. In one of the most important episodes of Atla, Bitter Work, Iroh explains to Zuko the different mentalities of the nations and their elements. To summarize, fire is the element of desire and will, earth is the element of substance and persistence, air is the element of peace and freedom, and water is the element of adaptation and change, specifically through love. In that same episode, Aang, despite being an earthbender and knowing its forms, isn't able to earthbend until he accepts the proper mindset.
That's why it's so hard for you to get this. You're working with your natural opposite.
I can earthbend now. The key is being completely rooted, physically and mentally unmovable.
Later, in another episode, The Firebending Masters, Zuko and Aang both learn fire's source, which supports what Iroh said.
That's why my firebending was so weak before. Hunting you was my drive, so when I joined you, I lost sight of my inner fire. But now, I have a new drive.
All of this establishes that the 4 mentalities of bending are necessary to do their specific arts, and the majority of Atlas supports this idea. Katara is the embodiment of change motivated through love. Aang is a free-roaming pacifist who prefers to avoid his problems. Toph is stubborn and will stand her ground against adversity, and literally every firebender has insane will and drive. There were some exceptions, I have a rant on Paku I'm saving, but overall, Atla was very consistent with this idea. Going back to Korra, showing what elements she can bend also hints at what personality traits she's natural at. Being able to bend earth and fire means she's a stubborn person with the drive to fight for her goals. Once you've seen the rest of the show, you know just how true that is. And as for her ability to bend water, well, so that's the positives of the scene. It establishes a setting, it introduces some lore that can be elaborated more on later, and it gives an introduction to our protagonist's personality. When defending this scene, I've only seen people talk about the last detail, that because the scene does such a great job establishing who Korra is, it's a good one. But like I said, you need to compare the good with the bad, and quite frankly, Korra's established personality is not as flawless as some make it out to be. We don't see Korra airbend because she can't do it yet. Later we learn it's because she struggles with a defensive mentality, as well as her biggest block, spirituality.
Ever since you were a little girl, you've excelled at the physical side of bending, but completely ignored the spiritual side.
I haven't ignored it, it just doesn't come as easy to me.
Personally, airbending requiring spirituality always felt like a smidgen of a retcon. Aang was a master airbender, and while he was spiritual, he was pretty novice at it, having no knowledge about the spirit world nor anything in it until after he was frozen.
Aang, you seem a little unsure about all this.
Yeah, that might be because I don't know anything at all about the spirit world.
However, I could easily be wrong about that since Iroh does specifically say that the air nomads detach themselves from worldly concerns. Getting back, however, the one mentality trait of airbending that Korra never struggled with was freedom. The first couple of episodes are about her longing for some freedom, and this is where the personality argument begins to have holes. While she didn't have every trait needed, I could much more easily believe that Korra could airbend before I believe she could waterbend. The thing Korra struggles with the most throughout the show is change. The entire series is about how things change and how bad Korra is at dealing with it. Speaking of struggling, love. Korra has one of the most infamous love lives in modern pop culture. If there's one element she should have struggled with because of her mentality, it was water. Come on, Shady, that would mess up the avatar cycle. Aang was an airbender. Water is supposed to come next. Korra being bad at waterbending doesn't stop her from being a waterbender. Zuko was not born good at firebending. He struggled with it just like everything else in his life, and Korra could have done the same. Also, Korra having issues with her native element would have made her opposite of Aang, who was a natural with his, which is often argued as the main justification behind Korra's personality and struggles. But more importantly, this retort misses the point. The complaint here isn't that Korra can waterbend, it's that saying the scene establishes her personality well is a flawed praise when that scene is giving us the wrong impression. If the writers wanted to make Korra a natural waterbender, they should have given her the mentality of one. However, there's a much bigger matter that needs addressing: the elephant in the room. The biggest complaint about this scene isn't that Korra can waterbend, nor that she can't airbend. It's that at the age of 4, Korra is able to flawlessly bend 3 elements. And yes, she is bending flawlessly. Some people get upset when I use that word because Korra is only doing basic bending, but the word flawlessly is not the same as the word masterfully. You can flawlessly play the scales on a piano, it doesn't make you a master pianist. Should Korra be able to do this? Well, according to Atla, in order to bend something, you need 3 ingredients. 1, you need to be able to bend the element either through a hereditary trait, by studying the original benders, or by being the avatar. Korra is the avatar, so she passes there. 2, as stated, you need to have and be in the correct mindset. Recall, fire and water are opposites. One is adapting the change, the other is enforcing it. So Korra instinctively figured out 3 separate bending mindsets, 2 of which are opposite of each other, and knew exactly when to apply each of them at the age of 4. The last one is that you need to know proper movement and chi flow. Katara, despite having the perfect waterbending mentality, couldn't always get the water to do what she wanted until she knew the movements. Aang was instinctively good at both waterbending and firebending, but didn't bend either outside the avatar state until he learned moves from others who already knew them. So Korra figured out the movements and chi flow to get 3 separate elements to do exactly what she wanted at the age of 4. Okay, you've pushed me out of my immersion. There's no way I'm believing that. Have you ever met a 4-year-old? Do you honestly think they have the focus and capacity to figure out both the mentality and physical movements of 3 separate bending styles on their own? I mean, I'm pretty sure a few of them do, but those would be extremely rare, and I bet money they wouldn't be as rambunctious and impatient as Korra. Now, to be clear, I'm not complaining that Korra is a prodigy. Atla was filled with prodigies, including my favorite character, whom I love partially because she is a prodigy. But Atla was the beginning of a series. It was establishing a new world, so it had way more leeway in introducing prodigies. T-Lock is not a new world, it's a continuation of an already established one, and Korra's skills need to appropriately reflect that world, even as a prodigy. But they don't. In fact, her skills go against established lore. In Atla, the sages had a rule that the Avatar wasn't to be told who they were until their 16th birthday. This was presumably so the Avatar could have a normal childhood and grow up to be a healthy adult. With a rule like that in play, and the fact that there are records of past avatars dating back for several generations, we have to assume it was extremely difficult to figure out you were the Avatar at a young age without outside help. Korra being able to figure out who she is, again at the age of 4, makes it so that this 16th birthday rule is pointless. The sages of Atla have been retconned to be idiots, and the avatars before Korra look like they just didn't even try. Now that's something I could believe for Aang, but it's a lot to ask that I believe every avatar going back for ages never saw someone else bend an element they couldn't and then try it themselves. The excuse I've seen some people give is that the world is more united in Korra's time, so she would have been more exposed to different benders than past avatars, and thus had more opportunities to mimic said benders. A, Korra lives in the South Pole, a still relatively isolated place compared to the rest of the world. And B, airbenders were nomads. Aang had friends in both the Earth Kingdom and the Fire Nation before he was frozen. He and every avatar before him, especially airbenders, would have been exposed to other cultures and other bendings. When Toph invented metal bending, yes, that was something previously thought impossible within the lore. However, it's one of the best storytelling moments in Atla because it showed Toph following the rules that were established in lore to learn something new.
I just bend the water into plants.
Even metal is just a part of Earth that has been purified and refined.
It also showed why she was the first person to think of trying it. Her seismic sense makes her uniquely capable of knowing the location of Earth inside metal. Do I believe a young kid can bend an element? Yes, we saw plenty of that in Atla. Do I believe Korra could prematurely bend more than one element? Yes, Aang did. He was a prodigy and pressured by a war, but he still did it, proving it's possible. But you're asking way too much if you want me to believe a 4-year-old with little to no outside help can bend 3 elements as well as Korra does, given what was established in Atla. And now let's get to the final problem with this scene, the infamous line.
I'm the Avatar! You gotta deal with it!
Based on the diction and tone, as well as the scene itself, this line feels extremely meta, and I'm nowhere near the first person to point that out. It's widely accepted that the writers put this line in to send a message. Some believe it was a message to the executives, but the majority believe it's a message to the audience. That message being, it doesn't matter how you feel. This is happening. This is your new avatar. This is your new show. Deal with it. Remember at the beginning of this video when I said I tread carefully whenever I attack my audience? Yeah, this is why. Go too hard and it prematurely poisons the well, closing minds to what you want to say before you even say it. If you've got any reason to dislike Korra or T-Lock as a whole, this line is just going to add fuel to the fire. It comes across like the writers had an ego trip, seeing themselves as gods despite the fact that they're running off the popularity of the previous show, which, to be fair, was their show, but as we've seen with George Lucas and other creators, just because something is yours doesn't mean you necessarily understand what made it great. Given T-Lock's execution, many people believe that the writer or writers responsible for what made Atla great were the ones who didn't return for T-Lock. So to recap, the positives about the scene is that it establishes a setting, builds up new lore, and demonstrates a good chunk of Korra's personality, though most people only seem to care about that last part. The negatives of the scene is that some of the personality traits it establishes don't line up, it ignores several points of already established lore, and whether intentional or not, the first line from its protagonist is easily interpreted as alienating and antagonizing. From what I can see, in comparing the good of the scene with the bad vastly outweighs the good for 2 specific reasons. The first reason is that, as stated multiple times, T-Lock is a continuation. Some people seem to have forgotten this, but at the time of Atla, heavy continuity was rare in Western animation. Things needed to be kept episodic so that people could watch cartoons in any order. Even shows that did have continuity, like superhero shows, didn't lean as heavily into their lore and stories as much as Atla did. If you missed a single episode of Atla, you missed something important because every episode built upon the overall story. You know, except the Great Divide.
Look, it's the Great Divide!
Let's keep flying.
And this respect for continuity and lore is one of the major things the show became known for. Was it perfect? No. It definitely had times where it forgot certain details, but for every time that happened, there were 50 other times where small details paid off in great ways. Korra's introduction is our first look at this world, which is one that a good chunk of the audience will already know. The writers used it to tell us that they're going to ignore heavy aspects of lore, a major point of the original, and that if we don't like what's going on, too bad. We gotta deal with it. But is it really fair to judge a sequel by comparing it to its predecessor? After all, the problems with this scene only exist if you've seen Atla.
Yes, absolutely, 100%. Maybe you weren't there when T-Lock first aired, but I was, and there was heavy emphasis on the story continuing where Atla left off. Shoot, the very first scene is a reminder of where this story comes from. When you're a sequel of a series, there are expectations that come with that, especially if you're banking on old fans returning like T-Lock did. But the bigger reason why the negatives outweigh the positives is very simple. We could have easily had a scene where only the positives existed. This is the mistake I find most defenders of anything make, not just this scene. They say the thing is good because it accomplishes X, but ignore that there were other options open to accomplish that exact same goal. There are lots of ways to change Korra's introduction to where it actually works. You could age Korra up. You could change her personality in the story to fit the elements she bends, or vice versa. You could have her bend only one element that fits her personality more than water, despite her clearly being a waterbender. You could have her say the deal with it line after being prompted to make it feel like it's a natural part of the story. There are so many ways to fix this, it's kind of impressive that the T-Lock team got it this wrong. But that's my take on the infamous Korra introduction scene. The bad it did greatly outweighed the good, and it was one of the worst first foot forwards the show could have done in regards to the fans of Atla. I'm Shady Doorags, you gotta deal with it. What, you waiting for my usual outro? This is a video about the legend of Korra. Why on earth would you expect consistency?